Hey everyone, I am so thrilled you're here. Today, we're diving into a really powerful explainer that's all about shifting your brain from that exhausting, endless cycle of overthinking into clear, structured, critical thinking. And the absolute secret weapon to making that shift? It's emotional regulation. We have literally all been there, right? You're trying to make a simple decision and suddenly your brain turns it into a full-blown, anxiety-inducing debate where nobody wins. Look, that is not critical thinking. That's just getting completely lost in your own head. So let's jump right in and learn how to sharpen your reasoning without overcomplicating the whole shebang.
Here's a quick look at our roadmap for this explainer. We're going to cover the overthinking trap, regulating your emotions, evaluating information critically, broadening your perspectives, and finally, structured problem solving.
All right, Section 1, the overthinking trap.
Okay, before we can actually think critically, we have to recognize what's holding us back, which is usually analysis paralysis. And if you've ever dealt with this, I just want to validate that experience right now. It basically happens when our brains start treating every single little choice like a high-stakes crisis. When we're overthinking, the whole process is heavily emotion-driven. It just spins in these circular, exhausting loops where you replay scenarios, you imagine worst-case outcomes, and ultimately you just avoid making a conclusion altogether. But on the flip side, critical thinking has a really purposeful direction. It's evidence-driven, it's focused, and it confidently reaches clear judgments without letting fear take the wheel.
So let's be honest for a second. Which of these signs do you actually recognize in yourself? Do you find yourself revisiting the exact same information over and over but never actually reaching a new conclusion? Do you notice your anxiety spiking the longer you dwell on a problem? Or maybe you're putting off a decision entirely just out of fear, rather than a genuine lack of information. Recognizing these signs is step one, because research consistently shows that this kind of overthinking doesn't just waste your time, it actively reduces the quality of your decisions.
Moving right along to Section 2, regulating your emotions. Now this brings us to the core pivot of this whole explainer. You simply cannot think critically if your brain honestly believes every choice is a five-alarm fire. Emotional intelligence and cognitive thinking are deeply intertwined, and your feelings impact your judgment way more than you might realize. So we really need to anchor our mindset in what's called the wise mind. This is a brilliant concept from dialectical behavior therapy, or DBT. It shows us that clear thinking doesn't mean becoming some cold, unfeeling robot. Instead, clarity happens right at the intersection of emotion and reason. You aren't eliminating your feelings, you're just balancing them with logic. And the very first step to accessing that wise mind, accurately and precisely labeling your emotions. Just having a vague awareness of feeling bad really won't cut it here.
Dr. Mark Brackett over at Yale sums this up perfectly. He says, effective regulation means choosing responses that align with your goals and values. Emotional regulation is absolutely not about suppressing what you feel. It's about taking a beat, recognizing the emotion, and then responding intelligently rather than just reacting impulsively to whatever trigger just popped up in front of you.
So how do we actually put this into practice? Well, the source material highlights journaling as an incredibly powerful tool for something called reappraisal. Basically, this means actively reframing a negative thought instead of just endlessly ruminating on it. Taking just 5 to 10 minutes a day for mindful reflection lets you recognize your own emotional patterns. It helps you evaluate if your reactions actually align with your core values, and it successfully shifts your brain from reactive panic into that deliberate, wise mind reasoning. It is a literal game changer for processing your emotions cleanly.
All right, Section 3, evaluating information critically.
Now that we've got the tools to regulate our minds internally, we can start applying this clarity out in the real world. Once we are emotionally grounded, we are so much better equipped to critically evaluate the endless stream of media and information that's thrown at us every single day. So, whenever you're reading a new article or watching a video, ask yourself this one crucial question. Is this emotional manipulation? A regulated mind can spot this from a mile away. You've got to pay close attention to tone and language. If what you're reading is angry, heavily sarcastic, or just intensely one-sided, that is a massive red flag. It usually signals that the author's real goal is to persuade, sell, or trigger strong emotions in you, rather than actually informing you with balanced evidence.
To fight back against that manipulation, we need to rely on credible sources using a quick mental checklist. First, check the authority. Does this author actually have expert credentials? Then check the accuracy. Is this content peer-reviewed or at least professionally edited? And finally, check the references. Are they citing comprehensive current evidence, or are they just throwing around vague phrases like studies show?
Professional fact-checkers actually use a technique called lateral reading. That basically means opening up a bunch of tabs and consulting multiple sources at the same time to verify a claim, rather than just blindly trusting one source, no matter how legit it looks. This is also a fantastic way to combat our own confirmation bias.
Let's move into section 4, broadening perspectives and listening.
So how exactly does a calm, emotionally regulated mind handle viewpoints it disagrees with? By stepping out of the comfy zone of rigid certainty and practicing perspective taking. Now notice, this is very different from just being open-minded. Standard open-mindedness is pretty passive and frankly ineffective against our deep cognitive biases. Perspective taking is active. It's the deliberate act of mentally stepping into someone else's viewpoint to try and understand their argument from the inside out. You aren't abandoning your own position or values, you're just rigorously engaging with opposing views through an evidence-based lens, which ultimately refines your own thinking.
I absolutely love this piece of blunt advice from Andy Tempt. He says, stop talking so much, and when you're not talking, stop trying to formulate your next clever response. I mean, ouch, right? That hits hard. But quieting that internal noise and that anxious burning need to immediately fire back a reply is a primary exercise of the wise mind. It is the absolute prerequisite for true active listening.
Okay, so what are the actual everyday habits of active listening? First off, like we just said, you have to silence that internal rehearsal. You need to be fully present, evaluating not just the words being said, but the nonverbal cues, and actively using your own body language to prove you are tuned in. And most importantly, ask clarifying questions. Connect this right back to our earlier point about evaluating information objectively. Asking targeted questions is how you fact-check in real time, face-to-face. It exposes hidden assumptions and fills in your knowledge gaps way before you ever form a final judgment.
Finally, Section 5, structured problem solving.
So, we've mastered our internal emotions, we've learned to evaluate external information, and we're practicing active listening. Now, to actually apply all of this to real-life challenges, we have to start with crystal clear definition. Ask yourself directly, what is actually happening here? Why is it happening? And what hidden assumptions am I bringing into this situation? If you skip this defining step because you're rushing to fix things, I can almost guarantee you are going to end up elegantly solving the completely wrong problem.
Once you've accurately defined the problem, it's time to dig beneath the surface. And a great way to do this is by using visual tools like mind mapping to run a root cause analysis. By throwing the central problem right in the middle of a page and branching out to related causes, you create this visual web. This approach is fantastic because it literally forces your brain to remain objective. It prevents you from just putting band-aids on surface-level symptoms and lets you clearly map out true cause and effect relationships based on actual, tangible data. Now, once those root causes are clear, you just move through these 3 calm, deliberate steps. First, generate. Brainstorm all possible paths without filtering yourself or locking on to the very first idea that pops into your head. Second, evaluate. Objectively weigh the pros and cons of each option. And finally, select. Choose the most logical, evidence-backed solution. Just take a second to notice how this calm, step-by-step process is the exact opposite of that circular, exhausting anxiety we talked about at the very beginning of this explainer. This right here is the incredible power of an emotionally regulated, critical mind in action.
Well, we have covered a whole lot of ground today, from identifying the overthinking trap to mastering this structured problem-solving framework. But remember, critical thinking is a muscle. It absolutely requires consistent practice. So I want to leave you with a challenge. Which of these tools are you going to use today to step into your wise mind? Are you going to rigorously interrogate a clickbait headline? Are you going to stop rehearsing your reply and truly listen to a friend? Or will you actively step into a perspective you entirely disagree with? Pick just one, practice it today, and watch how it begins to transform your thinking. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I seriously can't wait to see how you put this into practice.